So this entire month of June, we have been noodling on longevity and how long you may live in retirement. And it all begs the question, how do we make our money last as long as we do? It's probably pretty important, isn't it? Well, that, my friend, is the topic of today's Retirement Answer Man show. Thank you for joining me. My name is Roger Whitney. I am your host. And this is the show dedicated to helping you not just survive retirement. We are here to help you rock retirement, and we think you have the power to do so if you make intentional decisions, which is what we talk about here. And this whole month we've been talking about longevity. How long might we live? What habits should we build to make a great life? Now we got to figure out, how do we make our money last for us? And we're going to dive into that, but we can't do any of that until we have that all-important disclaimer. I do not pretend to have the answer. I am an explorer on this retirement journey because I work with clients every day. This is all we think about. But that doesn't mean we have the answers. And it doesn't mean we would ever try to give you advice if you were not a client that we worked for as a fiduciary. And you would be remiss if you don't remember that this is helpful hints and education. And before you make any decisions, talk to your legal advisor, your tax advisor, or your financial advisor, because that's just common sense. Now let's go dive into how we make this money last as long as you may last. They always say, start with the headline. Well, here's the headline on this topic of how we make money last as long as you do. The headline is, pay attention, nobody knows. Nobody knows how to do this modern retirement that you are entering. We have ideas. We got some really wicked smart people thinking about it, but it's never been tried before. You, my friend, are going to have a retirement much different than anyone else in the history of humans. You're going to live longer than any generation on average. You're going to live longer in retirement than any generation in history. You are going to be more active, more experiential while you are retired, meaning you're not on the park bench or in the playground. That means you are likely going to want to spend more money in retirement to do things, experience things, especially early on before you get to quote unquote normal retirement. You are likely responsible for all the money management during retirement. You likely do not have a pension during retirement. And financial planning and retirement planning as a whole hasn't figured it out, because we really are early in the journey of how do you rock retirement with the possibility of living over 100 and healthcare costs and everything, and on and on and on and on. So the headline is nobody knows. And I think that's really important to remember and remind ourselves when we are working with an advisor, when we are reading magazines, when we are listening to people like me or Michael Kitces or Wade Pfau or others that think seriously on the subject, is we're thinking on it. There is no grand plan that we know works. Now, that is discomforting, and that discomfort may lead you, or could lead you, towards becoming attracted to someone who says they do know, because we need to resolve that discomfort. That's human nature. But a lot of times moving towards something that resolves the short-term discomfort could be hurting ourselves long-term. That's how bad financial decisions get made. We duct tape it and we get the instant gratification of feeling comfortable until it's duct tape. It doesn't last forever. Well, maybe duct tape does. You get the point. So as we explore this, just take that as fair warning and as a challenge to you to become more intentional about making a lot of little smart decisions rather than making one big right decision. And I say this because recently I was reading an article in Investment News on the Retirement Income Forum. And it was an article talking about Michael Kitces and his presentation, who's a great presenter. He's a great critical thinker about this type of stuff. But he's an explorer. And sometimes when he's talking and exploring, people hear it as being prescriptive. And I think that can be dangerous. A lot of times in conversations, I think out loud with clients or with listeners or people in the RRC that I talk to. And I'm like, I realize I'm not prescribing here. I'm just thinking critically. There's a difference between hearing someone making a case and thinking that they're actually prescribing rather than just thinking. And I think Michael thinks a lot on this stuff. I don't think he prescribes, yes, you should do this because it makes total sense. And that's what struck me with this article. So the conventional wisdom is that you have a portfolio, and then as you get older, you get more conservative in your investment allocation parlance. That means probably having more bonds. So that is conventional wisdom. And Michael Kitces has presented some data that says a study of 121 different portfolio scenarios showing conventional wisdom getting more conservative as you get older actually has a negative impact on retirement income. And that advisor would be better off doing nothing than reducing the stock portfolios. And he said, our study shows you get better income if you do the exact opposite. So what does he mean by the exact opposite? This is the rising equity glide path. And according to the article, Michael Kitces said the sweet spot seems to be about 30% equities at the beginning of retirement. And then as the person gets older, it's slowly drifting up to 70% equities, according to the data. And he relays that, the key is minimizing equity exposure at the most critical point of retirement when the client is transitioning and they have the largest asset base, the longest time frame. And if the market falls early in retirement, things can just go downhill from there. He has been on the show talking about this rising equity glide path. A couple of years ago, we'll have that link to that show in Six Shots Saturday. If you want to listen to that, it was from a couple of years ago. And according to the article, Mr. Kitces said that if your goal is to reduce the probability of failure, the rising equity glide paths continue to be superior. And Michael Kitces always makes a great case and has great data for what he talks about. So my question is, as we think about this, is this a prescription? Should we be really conservative and then slowly increase our stock portfolio as a percentage as we get older? So we're 70% stocks when we're in our 70s. According to the studies, the math seems to work that way if you understand all the assumptions behind the study and you're only focused on withdrawal rates and they're consistent withdrawal rates, yada, yada, yada. Let's step back a second and think from a practical standpoint how that works. Now, I definitely believe that when you are early in retirement and you are going through a period of major life change, going from full-time work to part-time or no work, it makes sense to be a little bit more conservative. Just like if you're on a trail running and you come to a drastic change in the terrain, it's probably better to slow your pace and study your step a little bit until you get your bearings on the new environment that you're in. I get that. And I understand that a lot of the academic research on retirement has to focus on withdrawal rates and has to focus on financial assets mostly, and because that is part of the limitation of making it all a math equation. It's too messy to model life as easily. So we have to, for lack of a better term, dumb it down a little bit to make it work within the equations. But if you're going to use an equity rising glide path and you're super conservative in retirement early on, and then you're going to slowly increase your equity exposure, well, then behaviorally, how does that work? It feels good early on for sure because it's a period of change. If you don't have a bad sequence of return, you miss the power of compounding. And then when you're in your 70s or 80s, you're supposed to have a portfolio that can be much more volatile. Even if the math works out, does that work out from a behavioral standpoint in terms of reacting to the world and feeling at risk? You're going to feel a heck of a lot more at risk in your 70s or 80s than you will in your early 60s when it comes to the world around you, I would imagine. Well, and I've seen it. You're going to have a lot less options available to you if you're wrong in your 70s or 80s than you would in the 60s. So the ability to pivot if it doesn't work out for you is greatly impaired. And regardless of the math, in your 70s or 80s, how likely is it you're going to stick with a portfolio of 70% equities? I think there's a lot of value in this type of research and some lessons we can learn from it, but I don't think it's that we may necessarily want to implement it to such a degree. I would guess that Michael Kitces doesn't either, that he is presenting the data and showing what it shows. Implementation and how you and I use it with individual clients is a whole different deal. You know, you think of, okay, let's say we do this. We start off really conservative, then we're on board with increasing our equities over time. What happens if 5, 10 years, 15 years down the road, we change our strategy? Does that blow up all of the math and how this works? I don't know. But I would be careful in just thinking that myself, I'm including myself, or Michael Kitces or Wade Fowle or somebody else that thinks critically about this, has the quote, the answer when we're doing this research. And that's why I started this whole conversation with nobody knows what they're doing. We're building models. We're figuring it out as we go. And only after the data of people living, we haven't had anybody that we can hold up that I know of that can say, yeah, this equity, rise in equity glide path worked for me. Or enough people to say, okay, it's robust enough for us to actually make decisions today that we might have to stick with for the next 20 years. That's where I fall down in a lot of this thinking in terms of the research. I think it's interesting. I think it's a great model. It's very helpful. It's influenced how I've practiced, but I don't think it's prescriptive. I think we just need to realize that we don't have this figured out yet. But I thought it was an interesting article. I'll see if I can find a link to it. We'll definitely put a link to the conversation Michael Kitces and I had on this topic a few years ago in Six Shot Saturday. Another thing on that rising equity glide path, I would imagine some of that is it's really important to know how funded you are. Are you an overfunded, constrained, or underfunded in terms of the financial assets you have to support the withdrawals? Because deviations can be that much more important. Maybe if you're well overfunded for retirement, a rising equity glide path is not necessarily a bad idea because you're really dealing with a lot of excess money. I think that's one reason why we want to know our fundedness ratios, and we covered some of that a month or so ago. So for me, when dealing with how do we make this money last, it's going to come down to we can't predict the future. And since there is no plug and play model, it's going to end up having to be a series of lots of little conversations and the ability to be very agile in our decision making and to keep a lot of options open because there's so much that can be thrown at us, not just simply from a sequence of return standpoint, but from a health standpoint, life's curveballs, inflation, go down the list. There's so much that is unknown, and a lot of it's not even able to be handicapped very well. So I think absent having a clear path, we're going to have to be very agile in our decision making. That is not as pretty as having a model that theoretically might work. But you know what? Sometimes that's all that life gives you. And it's better to acknowledge that, all that uncertainty. Sometimes it's better just to acknowledge the uncertainty and build a framework to make lots of little decisions correctly so you can react to opportunities and to risks quickly as life unfolds. It's hard to put that in the brochure. So when we think about this, this is why I adopted a lot of the agile methodology in planning, is to make sure those little conversations happen. But when we're talking about how do we make our money last in retirement, there are some key areas that we have opportunities to move the dial and be intentional about. So I just want to go through those key areas to work into the rhythm of decision making that you'll want to keep revisiting over and over and over again. Okay. So number one is lifestyle choices. Lifestyle choices have a huge impact on the longevity of your money. How you define what a need is versus a want. We'll use different words. What a non-discretionary expense is and what a discretionary expenses are. For example, I know people that, non-discretionary expenses are non-discretionary. They're food, rent, or mortgage, groceries. That's food, right? Utilities, healthcare, things that you have to have. I know other people that say a non-discretionary item is my country club or my hobby or travel to a certain degree or gifting. Those are non-discretionary to those people. So how you define these terms for you is really important and is going to be a big determinant. And we've seen that in some of our retirement plan live case studies, where someone that on the surface looked like they didn't have a ton of money actually had a great plan because the lifestyle that they had to pay for was very modest relative to a lot of other people. And we have total control over this. Now, it doesn't mean you can't have the finer things in life, but it's a matter of what's discretionary and what's not. We make that choice. And some people will make a choice that they'll go bankrupt before they give up the country club. So we want to identify those things and define them carefully because that will give us optionality. Now, when we talk about lifestyle choices, we have housing choices, downsizing versus keeping a more expensive home. We have where that location of that home is in a high tax state with high insurance or low tax state with low insurance costs. Those are choices that we just want to make sure we make consciously and understand, because when you're going into retirement and setting yourself up for the next 30 years, a high tax versus low tax state, when you're drawing from pre-tax assets, yada, yada, can make a huge difference in your overall plan. Healthcare choices. A big one that most people don't plan is having those go-go years where your spending is higher and then you slow down your spending because in your 70s or 80s, you slow down from a life perspective, and then those no-go years, planning on that seasonality of how you spend. What type of activities make you happy? Some people, their hobby is shopping. Well, that is inherently going to be more expensive potentially than gardening or cycling, where once you have the equipment, your joy comes from the experiential part of it that doesn't cost incremental more money. A bicycle may cost a lot of money potentially, but unlike golf, you can use the bicycle over and over and you'll have greens fees, food, and all that other stuff. But, where we find joy doesn't always have to, and probably shouldn't have to, involve spending money. Those are choices that we have control over. So lifestyle choices are critical. And where we find joy in life is critical to making our money last. Now, another place where we can work to make our money last is looking at what social capital we have. So we did a whole series on this a couple months ago. Social capital are guaranteed payments from others, for lack of a better term. The obvious one is Social Security, which if you get the lifestyle dialed in, Social Security could be a big part of paying for that base lifestyle. So Social Security choices are critical. And then when we're talking about longevity, things like annuities, single premium income annuities, deferred income annuities, some people would say variable annuities, things that have some guaranteed payment to them for the rest of your life. So if we take immediate income annuity as an example, you give X amount of money, and in return, the annuity company guarantees to pay you so much per month, whether you live to 80 or 120. And sometimes it can be for both of your lives. So these guaranteed sources of money called social capital, guaranteed by the insurance company in that case, this social capital can go a long way in helping making your money last, because even if you blow through all your financial capital, you have these guaranteed sources of income that will help hopefully provide for your base needs. This is one reason why in retirement research, you have a lot of academics really have a predisposition to liking annuities as a solution. One is academics in retirement research. One, they're thinking more social policy than individual. Guaranteed payment solves a lot of people's problems potentially. And also they're very elegant and clean. They're not messy like holding on to your money. Now, what you give up with, say, an annuity of some sort, especially fixed annuities like we're referring to, is you lose the optionality of that money. So what do I mean? Well, if you buy a immediate income annuity and you give the insurance company $100,000 for whatever payment they promise, you never get that $100,000 back. So 4 years from now or 2 years from now, you need an extra 25 for some life event. Well, you can't access the 100 you gave them because that's a permanent contract. So you lose a lot of optionality. So that's some of the downside. Now, when we talk about social capital and we're talking about annuities, which can play a role in making your money last, that's one reason why, big announcement, next month, July, the entire month of July, we're going to dive into annuities, talk about what they are, what kinds there are, some of the advantages and some of the disadvantages to help you evaluate this for your situation. But social capital is a big area that we can look at to help make sure we have enough money for as long as we live. The next line of defense that you have a lot of control over is what we call human capital, which is your ability to earn an income. I call it pre-retirement work because my observation over almost 30 years is it's not the absence of work that people want. It's more time freedom to pursue things they enjoy. But we usually approach retirement as binary. We either are working or we're not. And if we're going to retire in our 60s and we have the possibility of living to 100, why would we give up totally probably our most powerful asset, which is you, my friend, the ability to earn income? I like the idea of pre-retirement, which is that in-between stage of full-time work and what we think of as traditional retirement. And the power of this when we're talking about longevity is every year you earn income, and it can be substantially less income than you had in your career. So let's say you made $200,000 as an attorney. You could earn $30,000 a year doing something. Every year you earn something, it has a lot of benefits. One is it allows you to not draw your financial assets, allows you not to draw your tax-deferred assets. It gives you purpose. It gives you socialization. It gives you fulfillment, all things that if you're not working and getting those, you're going to have to replace with something. And that something might actually involve spending money. So you get sort of a twofer on the downside from a money perspective. You get to make hay while the sun shines because typically you're going to have the option of doing some pre-retirement or part-time work early, get all these benefits I've talked about. You may not have that option when you're 80 if you had to. So you're making hay while the sun shines. So I think that is, to me, especially when we're talking about longevity, why give up that asset as long as you can still gain the time freedom to go pursue things you enjoy and you're not in that, traditional career rat race. The next one that would help is turning use assets into productive assets. So what is a use asset? So when we look at a balance sheet, you have your investment accounts, your rental property, your cash reserves, all that stuff. That's productive assets. It's earning interest. It's invested. It's doing something. But then we have these categories of assets that they don't produce anything for us typically, but they give us, the return is in the enjoyment of them. That could be a boat. It could be a bicycle. It could be your home is a great example of a use asset. Yes, it can grow in value over time, but you have a lot of money locked up in an asset that isn't throwing off income to help you live, per se. It could be collectibles. It could be any sorts of toys that you enjoy. At some point in time, you can have in the plan to convert these use assets to productive assets. The classic example is, and this is one that I know academics like, is the reverse mortgage. You have a paid-for house, you live in it. At some point, you do a reverse mortgage, and it starts paying you money, so you're slowly taking this big asset in many cases and having it generate income for you, and then it's all settled when you pass away. We will dive into those at some point. That industry has a bad representation from historical issues. There are more legit ways to doing it than a lot of us think in stereotypical ways. So we'll dive into reverse mortgages in the future, but that is something that can help us turn a use asset into a productive asset. And all of these things, my answer to not knowing as I'm working with clients is, well, if I don't know, I got to read the research, read what academic researchers are thinking of, looking at it from different angles. But at the end of the day, it's about making lots of little decisions and keeping optionality open. And when I say optionality, to keep your options open. Because as life unfolds, and whether it's in the markets or in inflation or in your health or life events, we want to have lots of little discussions where we're constantly reevaluating everything collaboratively and then stress testing it and then making incremental changes along the way. So it's about looking for risks and opportunities and prioritizing which ones are the biggest opportunities to improve. It's taking lots of little intentional action. It's about stress testing annually. And it's about being willing to make lots of little adjustments along the way. Now, in my book, Rock Retirement, I tell the story of a lot of times when I'm sitting with a client, I'll tell them we can't say for certain that you might not have to go from your really, really nice lifestyle to living in a trailer. Not that a trailer is bad, but I'm just using it as a metaphor. Because so much is unknown in this very long retirement that you're going to have, all the things that we've mentioned before. But the key is you want to make lots of little adjustments to mitigate damage and to take advantage of risks along the way. So even if you're dealt every bad card in the deck, you're constantly making adjustments so it's not you wake up and say, oh my God, moment. That's why we adopted the agile methodology and think in these terms. And hopefully we're encouraging you to have the right little conversations in your life. At the end of the day, I think that's the best we got. It's pretty good. With that, let's go get happy with Nichole. Hey, welcome to the Happy Lab, where we noodle on how to live a happier life. And although I'm here all the way in Colorado, Nichole, I heard through the grapevine that we have something to celebrate in this week's Happy Lab. So tell me what happened out there.
I rode all the way down the street on my bike.
Now, for those of you that are new to the show, I forget how long ago, we discovered that Nichole did not know how to ride a bicycle. So you rode all the way down the block, by yourself. No training wheels?
All by myself.
No training wheels?
No.
No garbage cans jumping out?
I had witnesses. My kids were there and Clay.
This is a big deal.
I was doing the exact same thing, but I knew how to ride it. But
that was Archer, Nichole.
Archer chiming in on my bike ride.
I think when they learned that you didn't know how to ride a bike, what were their comments?
It's so easy, Mom. Just balance and pedal.
That is awesome. And, this is actually a really good lesson because we're talking about aging and longevity. And a big part of that is what was the comment you were just making to me before we started?
I think it would be easy to tell myself like, hey, I never learned this as a kid, so I'm just not going to learn. Like, it's embarrassing to get out there and fall down and stuff like that. But I think one of the secrets to happier aging is, I mean, don't be embarrassed. Get out there, learn new things. Yeah, you might fall a little bit. The neighbors might raise their eyebrows at you.
Your kids might make fun of you.
Yes.
But you connected different. I'm going to be Mr. Scientist now. You probably connected different, certain things in your brain that weren't connected before as you figured this out because it was uncomfortable and you didn't know how to do it. And by golly, you rode all the way down the block.
That's right. I did.
Now, next step
stop,
is
the school.
Yes. And learning how to turn.
Yeah, that's important too.
On your marks, get set.
And we're off to set a 7-day goal to take a little baby step to rock retirement. Oh, I did it.
You did it.
Oh, okay. We got this down. Now, hopefully that connection happened in my brain.
Forever and ever.
Yeah. So we want you to set a 7-day goal. It doesn't have to be a big one, just a little one to be intentional about creating not just a great retirement, but a great life. So in the next 7 days, choose one thing that you want to learn. Maybe you are a little embarrassed that you don't know how to do it, or maybe you're not. But there's something you've been thinking about doing. For me, it's been knots. I want to learn how to tie really cool knots.
Oh, like Boy Scout kind of?
Yeah, I want to know how to tie knots. I can't even think of their names.
Okay.
Right? I think that's impressive. Oh, you need to secure that in a particular way? I know the knot for that. So for me, it's knots. And so there's lots of ways to learn that. But what's the one thing you want to learn? Maybe it's riding a bicycle. Maybe it's swimming. Maybe it's
language.
Oh, that's a hard one. But that's a good one for aging.
But it could be fun to learn a little bit.
Yeah. And by the way, if you choose that one, there are great apps, obviously, but also online coaches that you can find because it's having someone, I think, is really important in that. But anyway, whatever it is, what are you going to learn that's a little bit outside your comfort zone? Figure it out. I'd love for you to share what it is. We'll ask that in 6 Shot Saturday, too. Hey, did you know that I wrote a book? This is one of those best practices that we don't do on a show, by the way, Nichole.
Oh, is it? I wondered where that came from.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I wrote a book, and according to reviews, people like it. It's not like most retirement books. It's not all facts and figures. A lot of wisdom in there called Rock Retirement. And if you read it on Amazon or some other e-reader and leave an honest review, and I mean honest, and you email me that you did so, I will send you a free autographed hard copy. You just have to email me or Nichole, and I will do that if you check out the book. You can find it on Amazon. Just Google Rock Retirement, or we have a page on our website, rogerwhitney.com. Have a great end of June, people.
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of Retirement Answer Man. Be sure to visit rogerwhitney.com/answers to access the Retirement Answer Library with over 30 checklists to help you make the most of the only life you have. Remember, you have more power than you realize to create an amazing life starting today with Retirement Answer Man. The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Have a wonderful day.